Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today we're taking a look at a book that you might not know, but is attributed to a person you probably do.
Yeah, that's right. It's called Imitation of Mary. And if that name rings a bell, well, it's because it's thought to be written by the same guy who wrote the Imitation of Christ, Thomas à Kempis.
Yeah, I mean, Imitation of Christ, that one's been a pretty big deal for, what, centuries?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's one of the most popular spiritual books out there. After the Bible itself, people have been reading it forever. Bossuet actually called it the fifth gospel.
The fifth gospel, wow. That's a pretty powerful statement right there.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, what's this Imitation of Mary all about? What's in it for someone listening who, is a devout Catholic and wants to get closer to Jesus through Mary?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the book itself is kind of structured to answer exactly that. It's divided into three parts. So the first part is all about how we can love Jesus and Mary together, right? Like they go hand in hand. Then the second part, it goes deeper into getting to know Mary. It's like, who is she really? And then the third part is where it gets practical. It talks about specifically, okay, how do we love Mary? What does that look like?
Okay, so it's a guidebook almost, like a roadmap for getting closer to Jesus through Mary.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And that's what we're trying to do today. We're going to dive into this book, pull out the big ideas, the really fascinating parts, and see if we can find some of those practical steps that we can apply in our own lives, to grow closer to Jesus through Mary.
And for me, I think the most fascinating part is how it all starts. Like the book really dives into Mary's role in Jesus's life. Right from the beginning, the presentation in the temple. That scene really stuck with me. What about you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That scene is just so powerful. And it really shows how devoted both Mary and Joseph were. Like, they could have easily been like, oh, well, our son is the son of God, so we don't have to follow all these rules.
Right.
But they didn't. They were totally humble and obedient to the law. They offered the right sacrifices, even redeemed Jesus with those 5 silver coins, like it says in the law. It's such a tiny detail, but it's like, wow, they were all in.
They didn't cut corners.
Not at all.
It just makes you think about how seriously they took everything. And then, there's that scene where Jesus is lost in the temple. I feel like a lot of people can relate to that feeling, that sense of being separated from Christ.
Oh, for sure. I think we've all been there at some point in our spiritual journeys. We feel distant from God, lost, like we're searching for something we can't quite find.
And in the book, it's Mary who gives the advice on how to deal with that, right?
Exactly. She tells us she says, imitate my example and your spirit will be consoled. If you have lost Jesus, do not despair or be overly troubled. Like, don't just sit around and wallow in it. Get up and do something.
She's like, get busy.
Yeah. And then she lays it out, right? She says, do not stand idle. Do not cease praying. Do not be distracted by earthly consolations, but seek solitude.
So it's about being intentional, like actively seeking out God instead of just waiting for him to show up.
Absolutely. And I think that part about seeking solitude is so important, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with distractions. It's like, when was the last time we really sat in silence and just listened for God's voice?
Yeah, that's something I struggle with for sure, always trying to fill the silence. And the book is pretty specific about where we won't find Jesus too. Like, where are the places we shouldn't be looking?
Right. It's interesting because it says that we're not going to find him in those busy, crowded places. It actually says in the squares of the cities, in the company of gamblers, or those who live lives of ease. But instead, where is he?
Where is he?
It says in the company of the upright and the holy. So it's like, are we surrounding ourselves with people who are going to lift us up and help us grow in our faith? Or are we getting dragged down by people who are leading us away from God?
So it's about being mindful of our environment, who we spend time with.
Exactly. And if we've strayed from God, it's not enough to just feel bad about it. Like, okay, we messed up, now what? The book talks about the need for sorrow, carefulness, reverential fear, humility, and sincere prayer.
So it's like a wholehearted turning back to God. Not just the surface level, oops, my bad.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we need to change our ways. And that takes effort, it takes humility, and it definitely takes prayer.
It's a process. And something that's really comforting is that the book reminds us that even when it feels like God's not there, even when it feels like our prayers aren't being answered, he hasn't abandoned us. He's still there, working in ways we might not understand.
It's like that saying, right? God answers all prayers. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is wait.
Exactly. But he never stops listening. Now, shifting gears a little bit, there's another really powerful image in the book that I want to talk about. Mary at the crucifixion. Those words of Jesus. Woman, behold your son. How does Imitation of Mary present that moment? And what does it tell us about Mary's relationship with Jesus?
You know, that scene is just heartbreaking, but it's also so profound. The way it's described, you really feel the depth of Mary's suffering. She's not just standing there watching, she's experiencing his pain as if it were her own.
Like she's right there with him on the cross.
Exactly. It really shows the intensity of her love for him, and it's in that moment, in the midst of all that pain, that Jesus entrusts her to John.
And it's more than just a practical arrangement, right? Like, hey, John, take care of my mom.
It's so much deeper than that. It's like Jesus is creating this new bond, this indissoluble love and mutual pair between John and Mary. And John isn't just her caretaker, he's called her adoptive son.
So there's a real spiritual connection being made there.
Absolutely. And the book actually suggests that being close to Mary in this way, like John was, can open us up to deeper spiritual understanding. Like it talks about John hearing the mysteries of God and understanding things that are ineffable.
Ineffable. What does that even mean?
It means like beyond words. Like there are some things that are so profound, so deep that we can't even really wrap our minds around them, let alone put them into words.
So it's like Mary becomes this bridge, this guide to understanding those deeper truths.
Exactly. And it's not just about passively listening to her either. The book invites us to remain beside the cross, watch over Mary, support her, and console her. It's like we're called to step into John's role, to offer her comfort and share in her suffering.
To be present for her in her time of need, just like we should be present for others who are suffering.
That's a great point. It's like taking that spiritual lesson and applying it to our everyday lives. And then, of course, we come to the resurrection. The book talks about Jesus appearing first to Mary after he rose from the dead. What do you make of that?
I think it speaks volumes about their relationship. Like it just shows the depth of his love and respect for her. Plus, it must have brought her so much joy after all the suffering she endured.
Yeah, I mean, imagine the consolation. And it fulfills Jesus' promise, that he wouldn't leave his disciples as orphans.
He was true to his word. And there's that part in the book that talks about them having a conversation that no one else was meant to hear. It's almost like a glimpse into this incredibly private, intimate moment between mother and son.
And for us, it's like this beautiful reminder that we can have that kind of intimacy with Jesus too, maybe through our devotion to Mary.
Now, there's this concept that Imitation of Mary talks about that I know a lot of our listeners are familiar with, and that's Mary as the mediatrix of all grace.
Yeah.
How does the book explain that?
So the book portrays Mary as being in this really exalted position, filled with an abundance of grace. It's saying that every good thing, every act of virtue, every bit of holiness, it all comes from God. And Mary is like this perfect vessel for it.
Like a conduit.
Yeah, exactly. And the book uses this really interesting analogy to explain it. It compares Mary to Solomon's temple.
Wait, like the actual building?
Yeah, so Solomon's temple was considered this incredibly glorious structure, right? But the book says that Mary is even more glorious because she's the spiritual temple of God. She's free from sin, so she's even more deserving of our love and honor than any earthly temple.
So it's about recognizing her special role in God's plan. And the book doesn't hold back with the titles either. It calls her illustrious daughter, shining jewel of virgins, well of graces, glory of the angels, joy of humanity, hope of the needy. Like, wow.
It's like they were trying to come up with every possible way to describe her greatness.
And it's not just empty praise. Each of those titles points to something specific about her role and her ability to intercede for us, to bring us grace.
And then there are the 12 prerogatives of Mary that the book mentions. These are basically special graces that God gave her, connected to events in her life, like the Immaculate Conception and the Incarnation.
Right, like how she conceived Jesus through the Holy Spirit. It all points to her unique place in salvation history.
Yeah, exactly.
But, okay, all of this is great, but how do we actually apply it in our lives? Like, how do we take this understanding of Mary and use it to deepen our love for Jesus? That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, I think book 3 is where the rubber really hits the road. It's all about practical steps.
Yeah.
And the first thing it emphasizes is that we need to go to Jesus with Mary.
Not just go to Mary instead of Jesus.
Right. It's recognizing that we need God's grace, and Mary can help us get there.
Like she's our guide, our intercessor.
Exactly. And the book talks about the power of the Hail Mary, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. It goes on and on about how amazing this prayer is.
What does it say?
Okay, get this. It says, heaven rejoices and earth is amazed when I say, Hail Mary. Satan flees. Hell trembles when I say, Hail Mary. Like Whoa.
It's powerful stuff.
It is. And it goes on to say, like, sadness disappears and joy returns when I say, Hail Mary. Tepidity vanishes and the heart is inflamed with love when I say, Hail Mary. Like, every line is just packed with this incredible imagery about what happens when we pray this prayer.
It's making me want to pray a Hail Mary right now.
Me too. Seriously, the book makes a really strong case for praying the Hail Mary regularly and really meaning it. It's not just about going through the motions.
It's about engaging with it, putting our hearts into it.
Exactly. And the book highlights all these other benefits of being devoted to Mary, like finding comfort in times of trouble, learning to be more virtuous by following her example, and just generally growing in our love for God by praising Him and Mary together.
It's like having a spiritual role model.
That's a great way to put it. But one thing that's really important, and the book emphasizes this over and over again, is that we need to approach both Jesus and Mary with humility.
Like recognizing that we're not perfect, that we need their help.
Exactly. It's not about being self-righteous or thinking we've got it all figured out. It's about acknowledging our need for God's grace and relying on their mercy and love.
And it's not just about asking for things either. It's about constantly turning to them in prayer, thanking them, praising them, and just keeping them close to our hearts throughout the day.
Yeah, it's about developing this ongoing conversation with them.
And the book talks a lot about specific virtues that Mary embodies, right? Like qualities that we should try to cultivate in ourselves.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It calls her a friend of poverty, a path to humility, and a model of patience. It's like, look at her, learn from her, and try to be more like her.
And it's not just about avoiding sin either. The book specifically mentions trying to avoid doing anything that might offend Jesus and Mary. Like it's taking it a step further.
It's about being proactive in our pursuit of holiness. And, sometimes we might feel like our efforts are too small, like they don't really matter.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that way. Like, what difference can I possibly make?
The book addresses that. It says that even the smallest acts of service, when they're offered to Mary with love, they bring her joy and they will be rewarded. So it's not about the size of the gesture, it's about the intention behind it.
It's about the love we put into it.
Exactly. And the book also talks about Mary's protection against evil spirits. It's like she's this powerful force that can shield us from harm.
Especially if we're feeling tempted or attacked.
Right. And it says that just invoking her name can drive away those evil forces. Like, it's that simple.
So the takeaway here is that we should be actively engaging with Mary in our spiritual lives, praying to her, learning from her, and seeking her help.
And ultimately, it's all about drawing closer to Jesus. Mary is like this beautiful path that leads us to him.
So it's not Mary or Jesus, it's Mary and Jesus.
Exactly. And the book really emphasizes that. It talks about how Mary is full of compassion for those who are suffering, and she acts as a mediator for those who contemplate and praise God.
She's like our advocate, our helper.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to imitate her virtues, to try to be more like her.
Yeah, and to constantly seek her intercession, especially when we need forgiveness or strength to keep going in our faith.
And it all comes down to prayer, right? Like having faith that our prayers to Mary will be heard.
Absolutely. The book talks about prayer as being this powerful refuge, a source of strength, especially when it's directed to Mary.
And it even gives us this simple but really effective prayer to use.
Yeah, Jesus and Mary, like how easy is that?
It's so simple, but so powerful. It's a great reminder to keep them both close to our hearts throughout the day.
And it's a prayer we can use in any situation, even in our final moments.
It's like a constant source of comfort and strength.
Exactly. And the book also talks about seeking to see Jesus through Mary's eyes. Like, she helps us to understand him in a deeper way.
Like she opens our eyes to his love and mercy.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And for those who are going through hard times, the book suggests joining Mary in her weeping at the foot of the cross, like sharing in her suffering and seeking her comfort.
Because she understands suffering better than anyone.
Exactly. The book says that because of her immense love for Jesus, she suffered more intensely than any other soul. And knowing that can really deepen our appreciation for her sacrifice and strengthen our connection with her.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Imitation of Mary, what are the biggest takeaways for us?
I think it's all about recognizing Mary's central role in Jesus' life and how her example can lead us closer to him. Like, from his birth to his death and resurrection, she was there.
And she's still here for us today, interceding for us, guiding us, and offering us comfort and protection.
Exactly. And the book gives us so many practical ways to engage with her through prayer, through imitating her virtues, through contemplating her life.
It's all about deepening our love for both Mary and Jesus.
Absolutely.
So as we leave you today, we want to leave you with a question to think about. What part of Mary's life, or what prayer that we talked about today really resonated with you? And how can you incorporate that into your own spiritual life to draw closer to both Mary and Jesus?
It's about taking what we've learned and making it personal, choosing something that speaks to your heart and using it to enrich your relationship with God.
And we encourage you to explore Imitation of Mary for yourself and see what treasures you uncover. This is just the beginning of a beautiful journey. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.